Welcome. Thank you so much for spending your lunch break with us. My name is Michelle Ashton. I'm the Director of Communications for the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. And on behalf of the entire board and staff and our panelists, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Please remain muted until the Q&A session. During that time, if you have a question, use the raise your hand feature, and I'll ask you to unmute and chat with us. If you prefer, you can, at any point in the conversation, drop your question in the chat and I'll ask it for you. And I think that's all of our housekeeping items. So I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. Joining me are Dr. Andy Stamper. He's the Conservation Science Manager and a veterinarian at Disney Conservation. Beth Fershaw, she's the Florida Reef Track Rescue Project Coordinator for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Beth, that is a mouthful. And Jim Kinsler, Aquarium Curator at SeaWorld Orlando, and the Florida Coral Rescue Center Facility Manager. Jim, that's also a big one. Andy's going to get us started with some background information about corals and the disease currently devastating Florida's coral reefs. So Andy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, share screen, and we've got that. All right, everybody can see the screen, Michelle?
Yeah, looks great. Yep.
All right. So, hello everybody. I'm Andy Stamper, and I'm just going to lay out the land for introducing everybody to corals, reefs, and some of today's challenges that we're going to do or have. What I'm going to do is introduce the coral polyp and discuss reefs and their importance and discuss some of the issues that they're having and some of the efforts that we're doing to rehab reefs. I'm going to introduce you to our main topic of stony coral tissue loss disease and the global efforts that everybody's doing to understand. And then I'm going to hand it off to Beth to talk about the efforts that we're focusing on today. So the coral polyp is actually one of the most underestimated animals in the world. It's actually an animal that is both rock, vegetable, and mineral. And so this is the polyp that everybody's kind of used to. It's sort of like an upside down jellyfish. It's a relative of the jellyfish. And what it does is it produces these little castles, and this is an overhead of these things. And then they embed into that for protection, and it'll retract back into that. One of the interesting things is corals, they have a relationship with an animal or a little plant, a diatom called the zooxanthellae that produces food for them. So the coral polyp protects them, and the zooxanthellae produces food for them. And that's how they can live in these pristine areas that are really devoid of nutrients, which is why it's so crystal clear out there with a lot of reefs. There's just not a lot of food out there. So the polyps will grab organisms with their tentacles, bring them in, but there's very few of those. And then the symbionts or the zooxanthellae will help give food to them. So when you, let me switch here. So when you, this is actually a polyp here, and this is the little kind of castle where they'll draw into. But the human equivalent is like Mardi Gras, and these plants are like the zooxanthellae, and then the people are all the coral polyps that are with all their arms out, which are like the tentacles. And then this is kind of some different corals, and this is the polyps right here with the little tentacles, and this is when they're contracted. And then there's all sorts of different corals with different types of tentacles. So they're all sorts of shapes and sizes. But when you have all these little coral boulders that kind of grow together when they're a community, that's what is a coral reef. And if coral reefs are nice and healthy, you have a lot of diversity out there. It's just like a big city. There's lots of people, and it's a big party. But when it goes bad, it really goes bad. And the biodiversity goes way down, and the reefs start to erode. And so what you want to do is you want to have these reefs build through all these corals But what's happening is they're actually degrading. So a lot of the natural stressors are hurricanes, bleaching events, diseases, predators that are eating them. And then right now we're getting such a low population that they're not able to breed as much. And the stars are, the asterisks are something that we can control. Some of the big threats that we are definitely causing is climate change, and that is resulting in warming of the waters. And then what's known as ocean acidification. So the waters are becoming more acid, and the corals have problems with that. But also water quality through coastal development and pollution. Overfishing is an issue. Microplastics are actually an issue because those corals are desperate for food. And when they find a microplastic, they think it's a food item and they bring it into their stomach with their tentacles. And then we've got invasive species, and we're going to talk about some pathogens, boats, grounding, and then sunscreens are getting a lot of attention, but these other things are so much bigger, and there's a little bit of controversy about the sunscreens. So this is just showing temperature fluctuations. This is summer and this is winter, but you're noticing that it's getting warmer and warmer. This is from season to season. And then one thing we're trying to do is we can look at corals. The nice thing about corals is that they reproduce quite a bit. And you have two strategies, which is where they can subdivide themselves, and that's how they get a big coral head, because they subdivide all the time and get bigger and bigger, and it goes exponential. And then the other thing is that corals actually reproduce sexually, and the males will throw sperm up in the water and the females will send eggs up, and those fertilize. And then when they finally settle down, you start another coral where then they'll start subdividing again. So what we've done in the past, and it's still going on, is certain species, we'll do nurseries out, and these are two different examples of nurseries. And we have teams of people, and what's nice about it is lots of people can get involved in this. And then we transplant those down, we work on them, but you can grow one in 1 year to have all these things, all these branches, and then you can clip those off and then replant them down. And it's as easy as gluing them down to the bottom of the reef. And one thing that's happening is a lot of these, this is coral bleaching, which is fairly well known, but we'll talk about where the waters get so warm that the little symbiont, the zooxanthellae, are the ones that they don't like that. So they bail out of the coral. And this is actually, coral polyps are clear. And then this is the skeletal structure that you're seeing because the coral polyps are clear. And then they'll actually starve to death if it lasts too long. But the corals that we're starting to put out have already gone through this process, and they have a relationship with the symbionts that like warmer water. And this is a temperature logger, but these are ones that we put down from a nursery, and you can see they're doing really well in warm waters and other species are not. And so these are just examples, but this is a disease that goes through called white band. But the big thing we're talking about today is stony coral tissue loss disease. And since 2014, this has spread up and down the coast. And actually now it's out to the dry tortugas, and it's really impacted the reefs out there. And it's also spread throughout the Caribbean. And what's so devastating about this disease is it's affecting over 20 of the reef species that are out there. And a lot of the species are reef builders, and they're really important for structure of the reef. But this disease, unlike other diseases, which will kind of grow in the coral and destroy a little portion of it, and then those coral polyps can asexually go back in and what they call reskin the coral. This one, within a short amount of time, just devastates the whole coral head. And so right now we're trying to figure out what's happening to this. There are teams and teams and teams and teams of people that are all getting together throughout the world to try to figure this out because it's spreading so quickly and so devastating. And so we're looking at bacteria, toxins, the virus is a combination. This is an example of some viruses that are actually in the symbiont that are affecting the symbiont, and this is speculative right now. They're investigating it, but it shows how complex corals are, that the virus doesn't, or the bacteria don't have to affect just the corals. It's that relationship with the symbiont that is important. But there's also environmental cofactors, like what we talked about before. We're investigating that. And those may be compounding the issues like the warming, the acidification, the coastal development, and the runoff that happens. And so all those are being investigated at this point. And so researchers are tracking it. They're doing primary research on it. They're looking at biosecurity so it doesn't spread around. And they're doing treatments. They're looking at antibiotics, and some have been applied out in the wild to try to get this under control. And then there's actually probiotic work going on. But what we're going to talk about further in this lecture is preserving the genetic material and acting as an arc in the storm, and being able to save some corals back in a managed setting, so that when the disease does burn through, hopefully we can put that out or breed them so that we can get lots of corals out. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Beth.
All right, Andy, thank you very much. I'll share my screen. First of all, I want to thank Michelle and the foundation for inviting the three of us to talk today about this story, and thank Andy for setting up, just the basics. What is corals? Why are they important? Because in understanding those basics, then you can understand the urgency with what Jim and I are going to be talking about in our talks. This is a conservation story of hope. Don't get us wrong. This is a story of hope set for an ecosystem that's in decline. And we all know the Florida Keys, the Florida Reef Tract has been in decline for decades. It is not the same reef ecosystem that we saw even 10 years ago. And with this onslaught of stony coral tissue loss disease, it's really brought the ecosystem to its knees. In the hopes that you get the gravity of this situation and why it's so important that the work of the rescue of the state and its collaborators is going on. Keep in mind, as Andy said, that over half of the reef building corals that are important to creating the reef ecosystem, for creating that powerhouse, that biological powerhouse, that economic powerhouse for the state of Florida, and certainly that cultural powerhouse, those corals are in jeopardy. And to put the disease in perspective, naturally disease occurs, as Andy said. In about 2 to 3% of the coral population at any one time, there are diseased corals. With stony coral tissue loss disease, 60% of the population is exhibiting disease. Think about your own community. Think about what we're going through now. This wildfire of stony coral tissue loss disease going through the reef is historic in its magnitude, and it really calls for an historic response. Now think of yourself as a resource manager for the state of Florida, and you have this disease going through a national treasure, and you know that it has the potential of spreading, and it has. Think about what you would think about. If you do nothing, you could lose, like I said, a national natural treasure. But if you do something, just something, that maybe in 10, 20 years, you can tell your kids that I tried to preserve and to save this ecosystem, you got to give it a try. And that's what the researchers, field biologists, and resource managers of the state of Florida decided to do. A plan was devised. After watching this disease go through the state's reef system, a plan was devised. And a network was created to not only figure out what stony coral tissue loss disease is, but how it spreads. How do we treat corals that have it and prevent it from spreading to other corals? And how do we rebuild and plan to rebuild the reef once we have all these ideas in order? So in that response, a plan was devised, and part of that plan was a rescue mission. Unique in its scale and scope, what they were proposing is that we find homes for thousands of corals, remove them from the reef, and place them in land-based nurseries in the state of Florida and across the country. But the challenge was, who had the skills, the expertise, and the resources to take the corals that were rescued from the reef and hold them and become founder stock for the offspring that will restore the reef in the future? Well, FWC, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, has been working with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums accredited members for decades, whether it's manatees and sea turtles or grasshoppers or corals. The relationship is there, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission reached out to AZA and said, can you help us? So let's take a break a little bit in our story. And just so you all know who the Association of Zoos and Aquariums is, let's give you a really quick background on who we are. The AZA is a 501c3 organization dedicated to the advancement of zoos and aquariums in the areas of conservation, education, science, and recreation. The mission of AZA and its over 240 international facilities, accredited facilities around the globe, they want to envision a future where people respect, they value, and they conserve wildlife and wild places. So with that mentality, what better partner to reach out to help save a national treasure like the Florida Reef Tract? So you know what AZA is now, but did you know that the AZA is also the Florida Reef Tract Rescue Project? The rescue project was started in November of 2019 after the FWC asked our institutions to be a part of this rescue effort. And I'd like to share with you in that very short period of time, less than 3 years, what we've accomplished. To date, nearly 2,000 corals are in AZA facilities around the country, as far north as Detroit, Michigan, as high up in altitude as Denver, Colorado. We've got corals in New Jersey, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, South Carolina. We've stashed them away. And what we're hoping to do with those corals is create offspring to restore the reef in the future. Leading our team of coral holding facilities is Disney's Conservation, SeaWorld, making up the Florida Coral Rescue Center, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the Remote Marine Laboratory, and the Florida Aquarium. But we also have over 50 other facilities that, because they can't hold corals themselves for whatever reason, they're helping to drive this program. Communications, working groups, handling the business of the network that we've created. We also have universities, community colleges, even high schools helping us with the project. This Florida Coral Rescue dashboard is a great tool, and I encourage you to take a snapshot of that link there and check in on the dashboard on a regular basis. It is your hub created by FWC to monitor the rescue that's taking place. You can find out what corals have been collected, where they've been collected, and the facilities that are involved in coral rescue. But the real testament to what AZA and its members have really done is this slide right here. Nearly over 82% of what has been invested in coral rescue for the state of Florida has come from AZA institutions to date. That's over $14 million of the $18 million estimated to have been invested so far. That is a commitment that we're incredibly proud of. And part of that commitment is ongoing. Let's talk a little bit about what the Florida Reef Tract Rescue Project really is. It's a network, as I mentioned, with a clear strategy. Corals are received from facilities permitted by the state of Florida through the FWC. AZA creates a network of communication and tools and resources, a network of aquarists, a network of veterinarians, a network of communicators to go through our strategy. We want to make sure that this project is funded so that it's sustainable and can meet all the future needs of the project. We're recruiting additional holding even now because the corals that we have in holding now are going to grow and need more space. And in the future, we'll be producing offspring that will need space to live as well before they return to the reef. We also want to create enhancements, tools and resources that can make our holders work smarter and work smarter together. We also want to make sure that we're telling this story. So storytelling is very important to the Florida Reef Track Rescue Project because we want people like yourselves to be aware of what's going on, why it's necessary, and also to remember this experience so that we can be smarter managers moving forward, so we can all have a time when we don't have to have rescues taking place. One of the neatest things that has occurred out of this Florida Reef Track Rescue Project is the creation of the Florida Coral Rescue Center. It was a collaboration built out of one goal: finding homes for corals and bringing hope to Florida's coral reefs. It is one of my proudest moments as being coordinator for this project. We brought partners together that historically have not worked together before and have bolstered relationships as well between partners that have always worked together. This is an over $1 million investment in the future of Florida coral. And I'm proud today to introduce the site manager, Jim Kinsler, and his operation. Jim, SeaWorld, and Disney have worked together along with the foundation and all of our partners to make this possible. And Jim, take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. That was a very, very nice introduction. I do appreciate that. And thanks to everybody joining us today. It certainly is a pleasure for us to be here. I'm going to talk, as Beth said, specifically about the Florida Coral Rescue Center, or the FCRC. But, you know, certainly there's a lot going on here. Andy and Beth had set everything up as far as all the different steps, what's happening on the coast, what's happening with our different organizations, whether they be for-profit, nonprofit, government, what have you, all working together to form this consortium to save the Florida Reef Track. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the partnership that we have at the FCRC, which for me and for my colleagues is very unique. And it's something we haven't been a part of before. And the folks that we're working with are outstanding, and we'll talk a little more about that in some detail. What I'd like to start with, though, is I'd like to show you a short video. It's the first social media video that our FCRC communications team put together. So we had folks from SeaWorld, Disney, AZA, the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, FWC, NOAA, all involved in putting together a communication package at the point that we were ready to announce a facility, because we were very anxious for everybody to hear the story of not only the FCRC, but also the story of, you know, the Florida Reef Track Rescue Program. So real quick, we will take a look at this video. I apologize in advance if it's just a little bit out of sync, but I think you'll get the message.
The Florida Reef Tract has been in trouble for decades. Lots of different types of stressors have been affecting the corals and then therefore other organisms that live on the Florida Reef Tract.
There's just a lot of people who don't know that stony coral tissue loss disease is ravaging the Florida Reef Tract. So one of our main challenges is just spreading the word that this is not only a problem for folks directly next to the reef, but for the health of the whole state and really the health of our oceans and water.
The future of coral restoration for the Florida Reef Tract will include using these corals that were rescued as part of the rescue effort. Those corals will be bred to create new genetic diversity, and then once they are large enough to be outplanted and used in restoration, then they will actually be replaced on the reef to be the next generation of corals for the Florida Reef Tract.
It's a wonderful collaboration. We are working together. What's great about this relationship is that we're working in our own backyard.
We prepared for this moment by bringing together some of the best equipment in Orlando, the best knowledge in Orlando. The Coral Rescue Center is definitely one of the highest tech, high experienced facilities that we have in the world, I think, right now for coral growth. We have brought together a team of not only ourselves, but with Disney, AZA, and many other partners to put this facility together. And I think that's really shows that everybody's interested in saving these corals.
The Disney team is so excited to be part of this conservation effort, to be able to bring our decades of experience to the table and get involved with groups that are so passionate about coral conservation. And it's a chance to make a really meaningful difference.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. I have to admit, I think between Andy, Beth, Michelle, myself, we've seen that probably a couple of dozen times, but I still get goosebumps looking at it. So when you're talking about corals, especially, we are dealing with a few of these are endangered species. They're at-risk species. What do we do to save these animals, and what does a facility look like? What does it take to keep these animals safe for future repopulation of the Florida Reef Tract? So we'll delve into that just a little bit. As of right now, the Florida Coral Rescue Center is holding just over 700 pieces of coral. Beth mentioned that there are about 2,000 pieces or colonies of coral currently in the program, and we have almost 38% of those corals at the Florida Coral Rescue Center. So what did we do to start off? I think Beth mentioned that there were 4 key players very, very early on in this process that were looking at what they could do for facilities, what they could do to help contribute to this effort. SeaWorld, Disney, the Florida Aquarium, and Mote Marine. Florida Aquarium and Mote Marine already had coral research projects underway. They were already working on different aspects of coral biology and propagation and so on. So Disney and SeaWorld started looking at, well, where can we put a coral rescue center? Can we use some of our current property? Can we use warehouses or anything like that are adjacent to our properties, what have you, to be able to establish a rescue center? So we started going down that road, trying to figure out what would work best for us. We were looking at roughly a 3-year plan for budgeting and for labor and so on and so forth, and working through that process. And again, you have to remember this entire time was of the essence. Corals were expiring, and the FWC and NOAA folks were doing a great job trying to pull corals ahead of the disease line, get them at facilities like University of Miami and Nova Southeastern for safekeeping until they could be moved to their more permanent locations. We were very fortunate. We had reached out to several retail groups and some different facilities asking for equipment. We were looking for tubs. We were looking for pumps and equipment and lighting and all these good things that could help us care for these corals. One of the retail businesses we reached out to was Worldwide Corals. Worldwide Corals is a very large retailer here in Orlando, and they actually they do propagate cultured coral, not the coral that we find off the coast, but aquacultured coral. And they had a coral farm that they were selling. And they said, hey guys, if you're interested, we've got this entire facility. It's in a leased building in a commercial park, and we have all this great equipment. And it's already been proven. We've been caring for corals for a couple of years. Are you interested? So at that point, that's when we really started to gear up, and we formed our direct partnership for the FCRC. That's when we got Disney, ourselves, SeaWorld, AZA, the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. We all coalesced into this partnership once we got some legal matters out of the way, and we figured out how we were going to structure ourselves and the work that we were going to do and how we would contribute. We moved forward with not only, the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, I'm just going to say foundation from this point on, the foundation jumped on buying all the equipment within the facility. They took over the lease. They took over utilities, all that great stuff. So, you know, the foundation with regards to the operation of the facility is our direct business partner. And then our friends at Disney were very generous, and they provided the operational expense money for us to run the facility year after year. So I can't even tell you how awesome it was, the way that this entire group, all the people you see on the screen right now, came together to make this facility happen. And everyone had a very specific role. Everyone worked together. We were all, you know, the big thing I think is we were just all in alignment. Everyone's looking the right direction, the same direction. You know, Beth and our colleagues at AZA did such a great job of keeping everyone together, keeping us coalesced and functioning, you know, in concert with each other. So it's just been an absolute pleasure. Just real quick, some of the stats of the FCRC. Again, we have over 700 corals. We have 18 different tanks, which is form into 5 total systems that are separate from each other. Almost 6,000 gallons of water. You know, we're in a commercial park, as I said, so it kind of has that warehouse appearance, if you will. Everything started in 2019. Beth had mentioned that the entire FRTRP process started earlier that year. We were able to assume the lease at that facility and start working on some of the upgrades. We had to improve the electrical in the building and a couple of other items, but we were all ready to go, and we were able to get corals in on March 12th. That was the first transport. I think we had 7 transports total, but really awesome stuff. And if you look there, December 2019 to March 12th, that's a pretty quick turnaround. And again, that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have not only all that equipment and the facility available from our friends at Worldwide, but our partners like the foundation to say, hey, we've got the funding, we've got the support for you, we're ready to go. So between SeaWorld and Disney, we got everything kicked off on the, you know, infrastructure side and getting everything ready to go. Just real quick, this is a bunch of nerd stuff for people who like aquarium equipment. The point being is that it's state-of-the-art equipment, and you know, we spared no expense as far as giving the corals the top quality infrastructure needed to keep them happy and healthy. This is a quick look. That's our team working out at the FCRC, all professional aquarists, and a very proud group of people, and they appreciate everything that the foundation, Disney, and AZA provide to make this facility possible every day. And that's just a quick little blurb about the type of work the guys do. I love that picture in the middle. They actually wear little mining lights on their heads to be able to feed the coral early in the morning before the lights come on. So it's kind of funny to see them doing all that. That's the list of the 18 species that are represented at the FCRC. And looking forward, we're very excited to continue this project. We're hopeful for another 3 years at this facility. And, you know, we would very much like to be a part of the future of the FRTRP as far as reproduction and continue with genetic banking and, you know, participants in every aspect of this coral rescue program. So we're very excited for the future. And thank you all once again for everything that you've, you know, contributed to the foundation. And this is truly just an example of how that contribution comes to fruition in a very worthwhile project. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim, Beth, Andy. We're going to open it up to questions. So you can either drop them in the chat or use the raise your hand feature, and I'll call on you. So do we have anybody who wants to ask a question? Oh, I see a hand raised. Let's see. Well, who I am not seeing who has their hand raised, but I see one up. So go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
All right, this is Tim up in South Carolina. So down the road from Riverbank's one of the participating facilities. So I've heard a little bit about the project, not only from Jennifer Rawlings there at Riverbanks, but also the folks at KML who were one of the intermediate holding stations. But a couple of things. Several times it got brought up about participating in the coral reproduction phase, and that's a whole nother infrastructure that's going to have to be set up versus just holding. So with most of the funding coming from the AZA facilities, are y'all going to be prepared to make that financial investment to get involved with this the spawning and the reproduction, or you're really going to be counting on outside resources?
Tim, if I can take that question, I'm really excited that you asked that. One of the great things about this project is at every turn we're learning something new, and we're banking that information and bringing that to the next level down the road when we need it. And one of the things that we learned in the first part in the rescue is that we had time not on our side. We needed to jump and get the holding up very, very quickly. With the propagation phase, the AZA, the foundation, NOAA representatives, FWC, FWRI representatives are all working together to create a propagation plan and make sure that the funding is in place so it too can be as sustainable and as successful as the rescue has been. Because if the propagation isn't funded and isn't able to be conducted properly, what you get out on the backside is not going to be real good for the reef in the long run. So there is in development now working groups that are going to be looking at the propagation plan, making sure that we have really great folks that are going to be mentoring that program, conducting and executing that plan, and making sure that, like you said, financially there is some support to make sure that it's successful.
I'm glad Moat's involved because they've done a lot of that already. And then a question for Michelle, a real quick one. Is this recording going to be posted somewhere and the link will be shared at some point so we can forward that to others who would have enjoyed hearing this but are not on?
Yeah, Tim, great question. We're going to share the link on the eBlast the same way the invite was sent out, and then we'll probably find other ways to use it on social media as well. But if you want to be sure you get it, feel free to send me a direct email, and I can make sure your email gets it, just in case that you had any trouble getting our eBlast. And I just want to speak, Beth, really quickly to the funding. The funding part of Tim's question. We receive funding from folks we haven't talked about, in addition to all the many partners we talked about. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's Outdoor Fund was a huge help in getting the Coral Center started. The Edith and Curtis Munson Foundation gave us money. So, there's us as a foundation, we're writing grants for this. My colleague is, and so, that's something we're going to continue to do as this project goes on. But great question, Tim. Thank you. Do we have anybody else? Either in the chat or raise your hand. While we get some questions coming in, I thought, Jim, do you want to talk about, just because folks might not know, when you say feeding corals, can you talk about what you're feeding on, what that actually looks like? And then maybe you can tell the story. I found this really charming about the distance you have to do to ensure the corals stay safe and those kind of details.
Yeah, so earlier in the presentation, Andy talked a little bit about symbiosis and the zooxanthellae, which are a small algae that lives in the tissue of the animals. So they derive nutrition not only for the zooxanthellae, but we also supplement that with food. So he showed you diagrams of the tentacles and everything that they use to collect particles out of the water. Well, the guys, before the lights come up, so before sunrise, the guys will put those little headlamps on, and they'll have small shrimp. It's like a frozen food that we thaw out. And there's also copepods and some other crazy stuff that we feed them. But they'll go to each coral and they'll use a turkey baster, and they'll just baste the corals, and their little tentacles start coming out, and they're just grabbing all that food. But that's a major way that they receive their nutrition. And it's interesting because they'll also produce waste, just like any other living organism. And that in turn will decay. It turns into fertilizer, blah, 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 blah. Sorry to get crazy, but it's really awesome because there's an entire ecosystem in these tubs, and they're just able to sustain with a little bit of help from us and full spectrum lighting.
Andy, you referenced sunscreen maybe being controversial. We have a question about what we know about sunscreen and the health of coral. Would you be open to answering that?
Sure. So there's been a lot of studies on sunscreen and coral health. Quite a few of those have been where they've really kind of impacted corals. There's been a lot of low flow areas, which then tends to concentrate things, not only from sunscreen, but from other chemicals. And so, you know, with flushing of a natural reef and that kind of thing, there still could be impact, and you know, we should try to provide anything, you know, safer as possible, you know, to help things out. But one of the things that it's doing is it's overshadowing the other stressors that are happening to coral reefs, and it's really kind of taking the eye off the ball. And because, you know, the individual person is desperate to help, you know, corals, and it's the sunscreens have gotten a lot of attention on that. And so, yeah, it's great if they do that, but they need to think beyond sunscreens and really focus on the bigger ones, which is warming of the oceans, acidification of the oceans, and especially nutrient, especially with septic tanks are a big issue, not only for corals, but for the Indian River Lagoon, and it just goes on and on and on. We really need to control that kind of thing. Fertilizing your lawn, better usage of water. You know, I tell people to really kind of save on water because it's a twofer, because not only are you saving a precious resource and you're limiting a lot of the runoff issues, but also, you know, it's expensive to process water, move water, heat water, cool water, and condition it to go back in the wild. And that's a lot of energy that could be saved. And plus it saves you a lot of money if you've seen your water bill lately.
No, those are all great points. Andy, this I'm going to throw this question to you as well, but Beth and Jim, feel free to jump in as well. Tim's asking a question about how stony coral tissue loss is spread, and maybe about the role divers can play when they're, you know, disinfecting gear or, you know, visiting sites. And I know Andy and I were at the Coral Center on Friday. I think we talked a little bit about this. So Andy, if you want to share, and then Beth and Jim also feel free to jump in.
Sure. We're really, I mean, this is a Herculean effort of lots of people, FWC, NOAA, all these researchers throughout the world, University of Miami, NOVA, they're all really putting a lot of energy into this to try to understand it. And even with all this energy, we still need to do a lot more research to determine exactly what is happening and what's causing it. I call it a syndrome because until you really know what it is, the syndrome leaves it open for people to investigate all the avenues. We have a couple of hot leads, but there's a lot of research that needs to be done to truly understand it. Now, that being said, the epidemiology that folks have been working on is suggesting it's an infectious agent. And remember, I talked about those cofactors, an infectious agent, and also the host, which would be the corals. If they're stressed because of the environment, they're more susceptible. But what people need to do until we can prove it otherwise, you know, there's an assumption that it's infectious. So and there was just a paper that came out about, you know, they're really highly looking at bilge of boats, and then also divers with gear, and especially neoprene's a nightmare to try to disinfect. We are looking at, you know, different chemicals, disinfectants that are both safe for the environment, but it's also really important because it's spreading throughout the Caribbean that we find ones that have that people in various Caribbean islands can have access to. We have some very effective disinfectants that are environmentally safe in the United States, but that's not necessarily the case in all these different Caribbean nations. So we've got a hit list of disinfectants that we're investigating at this point, and we'll continue on.
And in addition to what Andy just shared, I've added a couple links to some resources, diver resources. If you just Google SCTLD and divers, there is a huge list of collaborative resources that you can check out related to how to deal with your gear and be a non-spreader, so to speak.
Oh, thank you, Beth, for throwing those in the chat. And I also put the link for FWC's Coral Dashboard that a few of our presenters referenced. That's in the chat as well. We're getting a couple more great questions about the stony coral tissue loss disease in corals. So we have a question again from Tim. Since the corals were pulled before the disease passed through their location, is there any research done on if they would survive being back out in the water and be more heat tolerant? So who'd like to take that one? Is that an Andy question too, or Beth?
I'll take it from a 3,000 foot level, and then Andy can either correct me or you can throw in a couple more details. Heat tolerance and heat stressing corals is under research right now, trying to look at what corals are predisposed to a more heated environment. Right now, there are a lot of research going on to those corals being returned back out into the reef and their ability to survive. Test groups are already being placed out there. Researchers at the state level through NOAA are looking at all aspects so that when we do go to this mass production of corals to go back out into the reef, we know as much about how to prepare them for that experience and as much as possible about how to manage them when they're back out there. Andy, I'm sure that you have some other stuff to share.
So, one of the nice things, and again, FWC, NOAA, the researchers in the various universities, they were very careful to make sure there was a lot of genetic diversity. They run models on it to make sure genetic diversity is as great as possible with the amount of corals that we could collect. And genetic diversity is our friend. It makes for all sorts of different combinations. Remember that when the corals sexually breed, they produce hundreds of thousands to millions of eggs, and there's a lot of genetic variation in that. So there will be animals that will not make it. That's just out in the wilds. I mean, I don't know the exact stat, but 1 out of 1,000,000 or 1 out of 100,000 will actually make it down and become a coral head. That's just nature, and it's kind of what we deal with as well. We have a little more control over the situation to try to get those animals in condition to go back out. But beyond even the efforts that we're talking about today, there's all these various environments that corals are breeding and thriving in, such as creeks up in the Bahamas or other areas which are super warm and acidic, and there's corals growing in there, and that speaks to the genetic diversity that even the majority of the corals are not doing well. There are ones that are doing well, and again, we can breed those and blow them out. We can just produce lots of them. So in that aspect, there's a lot of hope. And I will say, corals, if you want to pick an animal to try to get high numbers back out in the wild, and genetic diversity to help them cope with the environment that we're struggling with, corals are it. But that being said, the concentration on making the environment back to a better condition for corals is as important, if not more.
Thanks. I appreciate that both. Jim, this question is going to be from you. It's from Michael, who's sounds like he's an avid hobbyist. He's wanting to know if the water quality parameters in lighting intensity at the center match the environment they're intended to be outplanted in. to not have a hatchery effect?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, I guess what I'll say firstly is right now, our initial effort was to bring the corals in and place them in a safe condition. So yeah, as far as the actual chemistry, we are somewhat matching the natural environment. I will tell you that the PRAR readings are going to be a lot lower at the facility than they are out in the natural environment. I think, if, as a hobbyist, you probably kind of know where I'm going with this, but the corals go through a transition no matter how close you match up the parameters and the lighting. We can take our cultured corals that we have at home from metal halide to LED to T5 or what have you, and you're going to see a transition. So I think you're going to see over the next several years as outplanting, there's a little bit of R&D that's going to go into that as far as placement, as far as, habitat depth, so on and so forth. You're probably going to see a lot of work being done on how to either match or try to position corals in the natural environment, analogous to what they've been in to some degree. But you have to remember, we're going to be, the entire project, we're going to be dealing with tens of thousands, millions of offspring potentially. So there's going to be a lot of work done on, as we move into that outplanting phase on transitioning the offspring into the right conditions.
Thanks. Andy, I know you've done a lot of work in the Caribbean, so we're getting some questions about if the Caribbean islands are cooperating with the project or doing research on their own. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the coral work in the Caribbean.
Yeah, my focus is in the Bahamas, but I know the answer is both. What's been wonderful is that all the experts within AZA and also with all the government agencies, FWC, NOAA, and the research facilities, we have made ourselves known to that we will, help the other nations be able to try to work both out in the environment, but also if they decide to bring corals in, we're there to help provide knowledge base and stuff like that. Because corals, believe it or not, corals are one of the most expensive and one of the most fastidious animals that we can keep in a managed situation. It takes a lot of knowledge, and my hat's off to the husbandry group. I mean, I look at it from the veterinary side, but I say that corals, are probably 95% just husbandry, and to have that kind of technique, it takes a big knowledge base. And so those folks are, between AZA facilities and outside, they're super nerdy, they're super excited, and they're super, willing to talk about corals.
And if I could just also share, we are making a lot of the resources that we're developing through this project available to our Caribbean partners through the project, as well as through the network that we belong to that is managed by FWC and the partners of the larger coral disease or the SCLT disease response program. And just a really big shout out, that program actually has a Caribbean outreach group that specifically is for talking about how do we share this information that we're learning in Florida with them to help them in their own regions manage this project.
Thank you all. So we're coming up on 5 minutes, and it looks like we don't have any more questions. If you do have any questions that pop up, don't hesitate to send them in an email to me. You can either reply to the email that you received the invite to, or go on our website, wildlifeflorida.org. You'll see my email on the contact us page. I want to give our panelists just, if you have any wrap up thoughts, and then I'll do a quick conclusion, but wanted to give anybody a chance to say something. Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
I always want to say that I have been in the zoo and aquarium community for many, many years, and I am truly privileged to be a part of this project, and am honored to have such partners like SeaWorld and Disney. and the foundation, FWC NOAA, working on this as a person that loves the ocean, to be a part of this rescue story is really great. And I want to thank Andy Walker and Michelle Ashton and the team at the foundation for sponsoring this today. It's awesome. We love you guys. Thank you so much.
One thing I would like to say, which I kind of neglected in my portion of the lecture, is how important coral reefs are. I mean, as you noticed in one of my slides, they're only 0.1% of the surface area of the oceans, and they're responsible for 25% of its of fish and other creatures that are important, not only for aesthetic purposes and the fact for biodiversity, but they're incredibly important for fisheries, not only for us to eat them, but for livelihoods for lots of people. The other thing is recreation, which is extremely important to Florida with the tourism industry. And then the other thing is they're incredibly important for protecting coastlines. I've been working on a project, and I was out there about a month ago, and on the seaward side of the reef, we had about 8-foot rollers coming in, and by the time we got through the reef, it was down to 1.5 feet. They are incredibly important, especially with hurricanes, kind of ramping up, and how important they are. And right now they're degrading. So that natural seawall is starting to fall, and it's extremely important for us to get that back up into shape.
Very well said, Andy. Jim, any final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo a little bit what Beth said about the foundation, we're all very proud partners, and specifically the FCRC, but the entire FRTRP program. But working with Andy Walker, Michelle Ashton, I'd also like to shout out to Will Bradford and Stephanie Harrison, who help us at the foundation with our accounting and purchasing side of the operation, which you guys make life so much easier. But I just have to say, I think this is all something that we should be very proud of. It's a very dire situation, but it's incredible how much good has come out of it. And, we're just all looking the same direction. We're looking forward. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very well said, Jim. I'm just going to echo those thoughts. I want to thank first our panelists and then all of you for the excellent questions and participation today. Really appreciate everybody taking an hour out of a busy day to spend it with us talking about corals. The Coral Center wouldn't be possible without partners represented here today, AZA, SeaWorld, Disney, folks we've talked about like Worldwide Corals, FWC, NOAA, and then some other funders we talked about. But it also wouldn't be possible without you on the call. The foundation is able to be a partner because of contributions from supporters like the people on this call today. So if you'd like to learn more about how you can support the rescue and rehabilitation of Florida's coral reef, you can visit our website, wildlifeflorida.org, or you can send me a message. I'd be happy to share any additional resources or direct links to where you can make contributions. And just thank you again to everybody. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Talk soon.